It's like teaching. You learn more teaching than the people you're teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to figure it out and explain it to somebody, which causes you to understand it better yourself. The same thing with faith. When you share your faith with other people, it's the only thing you can give away, and you have more when you get done. Faith grows from within when you give it away, because that's what God always plans. And we need to unify and to do it with faith. And this idea of I have a faith, but I don't use my faith for political, wait a minute. You have to run the country with virtue.
Yeah.
And faith is part of that.
Mm. Hey everybody, I'm excited to share with you a special interview that I was able to record with Tim Busch in his New York City apartment just a few weeks ago. Tim is a serial entrepreneur and a very financially successful man who has been involved in many different ventures. Most of his money has come from his hotel business, Pacific Hospitality Group, which is around $1.5 billion in size and has over 1,000 employees. He and his brothers also bought out his father's grocery store, Busch Family Market, and they've been running that for over 40 years now. I love the fact that they respect their father's legacy in that way. You may know him from founding the Napa Institute. Their large annual conference is coming up very soon, so I'd check that out if you're interested. He's also heavily involved in Catholic philanthropy. You may recall that he and his wife, many years ago, donated $15 million to the Catholic University of America to establish the Busch School of Business. In general, Tim is a living legend who I respect a lot, and I think is one of the few people that I have encountered who is truly living their faith while running a very large, complex business with thousands of employees. Before we start, I want to give a very special thank you to Our Father Constructors and Associates for sponsoring this particular episode and making this possible in the first place. Christian and his team funded our trip to New York City and the camera crew that made this interview possible. If you're a Catholic involved in some real estate project, whether that's a school or a church or something related, reach out to Our Father to be your project manager. They will ensure that it gets done properly, on time, and on budget. Go to ourfather.us to get in touch with them. Without any further delay, here is my first interview with Tim Busch. As we begin, I would just be curious, could you help, I understand a little bit about all the things you're involved in, but it'd be really helpful for people who are not as familiar with all of the ventures you have, if you could just help me understand, like, what are the core businesses that you're involved in and what's the scale of this? Because I want people to understand the responsibility that you have on your shoulders.
Yeah, my original business, which was a family business, was Busch's Markets in Michigan, southeastern Michigan. So those have become a fairly major cornerstone of our investment portfolio, but I own them with two of my brothers. My parents are gone, and we've built the business since we bought it from them 40 years ago. And so that's one of the businesses. The business I'm more active in is hotels. So we have about 1.5 billion in hotels, and so maybe a little more. And that includes 11 hotels with 1,500, 1,600 employees.
Wow.
And it does about 400 million in top line revenue. So and then we're in the wine business, which is more of an avocation than a business, but we do, it's a business. And then I have a law firm, but I'm not as active in that anymore, but I still have the firm, and it does support legal consultation for various matters I'm involved with.
Yeah. And then you've got some other things with the Napa Institute. And are those, do you not consider those necessarily as much in the business portfolio because they're nonprofit?
Yeah, they're nonprofits. So about half my time's a nonprofit. So Napa Institute would be the biggest one we're involved with, Napa Legal Institute. And then just my foundation work, which is Napa Institute Foundation, that I use to fund mostly lay apostolates that are strategically collaborating with Napa Institute.
Yeah. Now, I think that's actually the first part I wanted to start about. Is I've heard a lot of people talk about how important the Napa Institute has been to them and just the things you're doing with that. But I'm curious, what is the real origin of why you started that? It wasn't necessarily talked a whole lot about in the book that your daughter wrote about you. So I'm curious, like, what was the real origin of that? And can you explain why you would put so much effort into building that?
Yeah, Napa's been around for 16 years. We started out as a summer conference, and it's really it's not membership. It's basically a la carte. Open architecture, anybody can come. We're starting to see a movement of some Protestants that are coming, but it's really a Catholic conference. But there's a lot of crossover. And today we have events every week going on all over the country. And we're really just trying to engage Catholics, both laity, professed religious, priests, bishops, and they all come to the summer conference, but they're also involved in either speaking at or participating in the other events we do.
Mm-hmm.
So we have offices in Washington, D.C., New York, and Orange County, and Irvine. And then we do events in pretty much every major city in the country. And then we do events over in Europe. And we take trips in various places. This year we did Alaska, we're doing Vancouver, and then we're doing Niagara Falls, Canada.
Okay.
3 trips. And we also went to Rome with a group in April.
Okay.
So
nice. And the point of it is you're trying to help them kind of come deeper in their faith. Do you target a particular type of group of people that you would like to come? And then like, how does that work? Because I'm always curious about this idea of bringing people deeper.
I would say our mainstay group is average age of 60.
Okay.
We're trying to lower that. And it's an immersion of faith, business, politics, and personal lifestyle together. It's a Catholic lifestyle organization.
Okay.
So we're bringing events, but we're really trying to get people connected, people lifted up in their faith, teaching them faith formation, liturgy, and fraternity. And so we do now have Napa Nights, New York, and Napa Nights, DC. Those are focused on people like 20 to 40. So we're and we collaborate with Fide entrepreneurs, young Catholic professionals, Napa Institute, Forum, and those are attracting people in that age group. And then so we cross market to those folks. And it's an investment where we do charge for our events, but we don't charge the cost. We charge a fraction of it just so that they have skin in the game.
Is it important to bring these people together for these specific events, particularly because these type of people don't usually overlap? You're talking about bringing some religious in there as well as the business people?
Yes, I think they do more today, but it's just another venue to do that. So we have a chaplain, a 37-year-old chaplain, Father Jonah Teller, who's very dynamic in the city here. And then we use Opus Dei priests in Washington, D.C., as well as here. But I think it's important for people to get to know priests so that they have a spiritual director, a confessor, and they can be held accountable,
Yeah. Well, who can be held accountable? The business owner or both?
Both, business owner, but I mean, it really is uplifting to priests and religious and bishops to see this, to see the witness of laity to their faith, because they're human beings just like we are, formed to be in their profession. Yeah. But that doesn't mean they don't have the challenges that we do.
Yeah, that makes sense. What are some of the like the biggest outcomes that you've seen from that so far, or the things that matter the most to you that you've seen as outcomes from doing this for 16 years?
Well, we've developed a huge fraternity. There's a lot of crossover with other organizations that I mentioned, plus also like Legatus, which is a Catholic CEO organization, Papal Foundation, numerous lay apostolates. So we probably have 150 lay apostolates that participate in our events, to learn and also B, to meet benefactors and new friends for their lay apostolates. We're a convener of lay apostolates, so we want lay apostolates to do the evangelization work of the church, but they're tethered to the church, meaning they're not independent entities. So they're creating new dogma. They're following the teachings of the church through having a chaplain that's a Roman Catholic priest, or even in addition to that, having an ecclesiastical advisor, a bishop, one of the 330 bishops in the country, be the ecclesiastical advisor, so that it's assured that the organization is not at odds with the church. Yeah. And its teaching.
Yeah, because it could be very easy to accidentally, speak something that's not correct, even if they're not intentionally trying to do that, right?
Well, it's the same thing you have with Protestants, and you have 40,000 Protestant sects, and everybody believes something slightly different, and it becomes whatever the minister feels and interprets the Bible to be, instead of using what we call the magisterium. And we're the only major faith that has a magisterium. The Jewish faith doesn't. It goes on rabbis. The Muslim faith doesn't. It goes on imams. They have the Quran and the Torah, and we have the Bible, but, you can take any verse and apply it to your beliefs if you're creative and understand.
When a lay apostolate is trying to do things in line with the church and they want to bring the bishop involved, I've heard stories that it's really challenging sometimes because the church is not necessarily always liking to move fast, and that's especially true of certain priests and bishops. How have you seen that people have navigated that successfully? And you've obviously done this a few times. Like, how do you actually engage them in a way that allows you to move quickly enough, but also like keep that guidance?
Yeah, you're really looking at the priest and or the bishop to be responsive. They're not the evangelization component. That's the problem with the church. It is a bureaucracy. And it's not a market-based
Yeah.
organization. They have a monopoly and a territorial, where lay apostolates don't have any territory. They don't have a monopoly, and they're funded by dollars based on market conditions. In other words, nobody's going to give you money unless they see results.
Yeah.
Where the church, they might just give money as a matter of tithing and not necessarily hold the church accountable. So it's a different, lay apostolates are market-driven and the church is institutional. So it's a top-down type of organization. So you have to have both, because one is the protector of the magisterium.
I see.
But they've not been as effective. And it varies too by bishop. And where a lay apostolate, if it's not successful, it'll go out of business. And then some other lay apostolate will pop up. And it's also competitive. I mean, there's lay apostolates that are in the same space. We just named a few that are in the young professional space. And I don't view evangelization as competitive.
Yeah.
I think if somebody saves a soul that I didn't get to, then that's all great.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not making any money off of it. I think so many of our apostolates, in particular our church, tries to dilute competition and saying, we're at cross purposes. And usually competition makes everybody better. And I'm a true believer that innovation comes out of necessity. It doesn't just happen.
It's also interesting that since I work on Catholic Founders, I encounter a lot of people who are trying to build something that's, specifically selling to Catholics or Catholic business owners. Obviously, the point of Catholic Founders is for all Catholic entrepreneurs, regardless if they're, specifically Catholic externally or not. But some people get frustrated when somebody is competing with them. It's like, well, if they're competing, that must mean they saw something that you didn't, or they're doing a better job than you. Right? Just because you're Catholic doesn't mean we aren't going to buy from you. You still have to be excellent at what you produce, right?
Yeah, it should be that way. It should be market-based. That's the best system we have in the world. We shouldn't have somebody saying we ought to go build something if you don't need it. This is what we have going on in China and other command markets like that. The people at the top are making decisions instead of the consumer. And so they're spending money the consumer doesn't necessarily want to be spent.
Well, in many cases, they're also just building things in order to bring down the prices elsewhere. Like they'll overproduce anyways, just because they want to compete with producing the EVs. My understanding, I work in the clean tech space. They're producing all these EVs right now that aren't really being used. That's okay. They're trying to beat America at that market. But no, I think it's a very fascinating dynamic with the Catholic world, because it seems to me, you've had more exposure to other apostolates in other countries. I'm assuming you have a perspective on this, but there's something very unique about the American component of Catholicism, that we integrate this entrepreneurship to what we're doing. There's so many interesting apostolates that have come out of America specifically. And I think that, if I remember correctly, there was a couple references in Pope Leo's encyclical that just came out about how we have this unique timing. And there's a reason why, maybe it was somebody's interpretation of it, but somebody was saying that there's a reason why America was discovered later. God allowed it to be discovered later for his timing purposes. And there's a role that we particularly can play in this century of bringing God to everybody else. I'm curious if you have a perspective on that, like the American role in the church.
Yeah, and America is a unique country because it's based on immigrants. The Native Americans, and even they were immigrants, just had helped to get here earlier.
Yeah.
It's a new land. And so there's a diversity that you don't have in a culture, especially like Japanese or Chinese. Japanese they don't allow immigrants, to become citizens. And so you have a homogeneous society, but that's not always the best. Sometimes you need different gifts. But we've done a lot of work on the idea of why is it that the church here is more evangelical and more entrepreneurial than other places in the world. And it's simple. One, we've always been an entrepreneurial society because we've been market-based, capitalist, and we're not waiting for the government to tell us what to do and how to do it, which most countries, their origination is based on that. And the Asian and European countries are based on that. So it's been going on for centuries, and so nobody even knows, they just defer to the government, which we would never think of doing.
Yeah.
The other thing is our tax laws, which support lay apostolates and the church itself, are extremely liberal. They're very, very generous, meaning in most foreign countries, you can deduct about 1% of your income for charitable. In our country, you can deduct 60%. So people can actually put money into the church and get a tax deduction and save 35 to 45 state and income. They also can use creative things like appreciated property. They can donate an asset, say Apple stock you bought for $1, donate it for worth $10 and not pay any tax on on the $10 or get a $10 deduction. Those things, they're just like foreign concepts to other places. The governance in the United States is extremely effective because we have religious liberty, which no other country has the religious liberty protections we have. So you can go out, set up a lay apostolate, and say, I'm only going to hire Catholics and I'm only going to cater to Catholics, but I want a tax deduction for the money I'm putting in. And that's completely legal. And it's been supported by a significant majority of Supreme Court justices on both sides of the aisle. So those are three. Americans are very entrepreneurial as a rule. We create 90% of the new ideas are created here, not because we're so smart. We just have a better governance system. Yeah. In Japan or other places, if you make a mistake, which there's no way to innovate and not make mistakes, you have to jump off a building. No one would think about that here. Yeah. You just close up shop and start someplace else.
Yeah. Just round two. Yeah. Just keep going. No, I like that. Hey everybody, here's a quick word about our sponsors. Our Father Constructors and Associates is a Catholic-owned construction and project management firm. If you're involved in a diocese, parish, school, or religious community, and you've got a building project on the horizon, you need to talk to Our Father Construction. They will help you fund it, build it, execute it, and make sure that the momentum keeps going from concept all the way through to completion. They should be your go-to construction project manager. They will choose the right architects, designers, and contractors, and they'll protect your budget, oftentimes finding you savings where you didn't even know they existed. And, of course, making sure that what gets built actually serves the church for generations because they genuinely care. They structure and manage projects all the way from $1 to $45 million. To learn more, reach out to ourfather.us or email Christian directly. And I can speak personally in saying, I know Christian, I've known him for a while, he's a very good friend of mine, he's somebody that I would trust with my life and my family. So reach out to Christian, that's CRISTIAN at ourfather.us if you have a project on the horizon and you want to make sure it gets done right. These guys will take care of you and they'll make sure everything turns out right and all for the glory of God. And tell them Silas sent you. Now let's get back to the show. So this is interesting. You are involved obviously in many for-profit entities and non-profit entities. How do you, decide which route to take depending on the project? And how do you decide how to allocate capital towards either one? Because some people will say, you shouldn't, wealthy people should just give money away. But I tend to disagree with that. I think Jeff Bezos had a recent interview he was talking about, I do more good with the people I employ and the businesses I run because those continue to grow in value and many people are employed. I will do way more good there than I will ever do on my philanthropy side. So what is your perspective on how to decide which route to go in the particular situation?
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. I don't know Jeff Bezos, but I know who he is. And there's some truth to that. On the other hand, I think a certain amount of your investment portfolio should be where your passion is. I believe that you don't just invest to make money. Most people look at that concept to be, what? I thought that's what it was all about. And sometimes, life is short and it goes by very quickly. And if you don't have any fun doing what you're doing, I'm in the hospitality business, yes, to make money, but I probably could make more money in self-storage. But self-storage is about as attractive to me as nothing. It's like just a boring business. Yeah. And so it's great that people are involved with it. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not just like I'm in the wine business. I'm in it not to make money because you don't. You enjoy it. Yeah. And so I think you can do both, but I do think that the soul, Jeff Bezos' soul and any other person, needs not only the co-creation of a business, but being able to support their passions, whether it's faith or something else. And if you're running a public company, that violates fiduciary duty to be supporting, unless you have what's called a public benefit corporation, where you can allow mission to override profit.
Are any of your companies public?
No.
Okay.
No, they're not. I own public companies, but I didn't start them.
Yeah.
I think it's important for the person to have passions and to support those passions. In my case, my faith. And so we donate a significant amount to mainly lay apostolates, sometimes church things, but I don't think it's as efficient use of capital. Now, one of the other things that begs the question is not to give the money without accountability. There's this, you should give and let the people you gave it to own and control it. Why? They didn't earn it. They have concept, just like somebody that's starting a company, but you have a duty to do due diligence and to make sure they've done and agreed and done what they said they were going to do. If they don't give them any more money.
Yes.
And that's the best way to correct that issue. And a lot of nonprofits, they don't like that. It's fine. Just somebody else's money, And I would think that there are people out there that give money without strings. They're not doing themselves, the nonprofit or the person starting the nonprofit, any favors.
I mean, this is why there's so much pent-up negative energy against many of the nonprofits, for example, in large cities where there's these, they're supposed to benefit the homeless, but as a result, because of their incentive structure, they just actually make more homeless. And it's the same exact thing. There's no accountability for it.
Yeah, there's no end game, and those are probably government funded. If they were funded by private individuals, the chances are you would do better.
Yeah.
Not necessarily guaranteed, but the source of the money has to be the guide. It has to be the moral compass. It has to be the North Star. And this is why we need to get government out of anything that's subsidiarity, like homelessness or education or healthcare. They just do not, it's just not a political thing. This applies to both Democrats, Republicans, and independents. The government is not set up that way. It doesn't have a market-based, innovative system. They can't do innovation in the government.
So how do you propose that we try to adjust that? Because the core reason why I've noticed a lot of people don't want to give money to do things locally, or they personally don't want to help their neighbor who's in need, is because they're like, oh, well, the government has these social services, they'll take care of it. And nobody has a sense of responsibility to their neighbor. So therefore they don't. I lived in New York City for 4 years. I admit I didn't really know my neighbors after 2 years in this one apartment. But I'm just wondering, how do we get over that fact that we're paying huge amounts of taxes and still engage anyways to help locally, so that eventually the government can stop doing that? I don't know how you translate that eventually into defunding those programs, but how does one do that and get over it?
Yeah, I've been very outspoken about government must defund these organizations and let private enterprise take it over. And they've given plenty of incentives, as I mentioned, to do that. Tax incentives. Plus, private enterprise can do it for about 10 cents on the dollar and can do it with accountability to the homeless person in your example, or to whoever you're helping. The government can't. We're witnessing this.
Hey there, quick interruption. Before we get back to our guest, let's talk about stewardship. A lot of the capital allocators and investors who listen to this show tell me that they want to put their capital to work supporting other Catholic businesses. The problem is, finding those builders has always been incredibly difficult. That is why we launched a dedicated investor newsletter over at catholicinvestors.co or catholicdealflow.com if that's easier to remember. When you subscribe, you aren't signing up for a fund, an investment platform, or any kind of advisory service. It's simple. We publish a regular newsletter cycle that shares strictly factual, unhyped business overviews and metrics from active Catholic-led ventures that are looking for capital. There are no sales pitches, no transaction fees. It is a passive digital bulletin board delivered straight to your inbox so you can do your own independent vetting. If you want to see who is building in the ecosystem and seeking capital, go to catholicdealflow.com and join the newsletter list today. All right, back to the show.
Tens of billions of dollars have been stolen by groups of people throughout the country that were programs to help their own people, and they've stolen the money and feel something like it's theirs to steal. And this is really, really sad. And if we didn't have those programs, nobody be stealing it for certain things. They need to be in charge of defense, security, making and passing laws, but they shouldn't be involved in education for sure. That should be done at the local level. And homelessness the same way. I mean, if you're running a homeless shelter and it's run locally, you know who's on drugs or alcohol and who's not. You got to hold them accountable, tough love.
Yeah.
You're not doing them any favor, enabling them. And we also don't do anybody favors paying them to do nothing.
Yeah.
If anybody's on unemployment, assuming they're not sick in a bed, they ought to be doing something for it.
Yeah.
Even Roosevelt started this back in 1929, which is where all of this began. He intended it to be transitory because of the Depression, but he had a work program. That's how it built the Empire State Building. Mm-hmm. They built it in 15 months. You can't even get a permit in 15 months. They built it in 15 months. It was the greatest building in the history of the world at the time. But they were funded in large part by government grants. They did a lot of public works, putting in streets and sewer and water and that kind of thing. So they had to go out and work, learn a trade, and then the government subsidized it because at the time, there wasn't any money out there to do these public works programs. So that is okay, but today that shouldn't be necessary because the liquidity today is so much different than it was back in 1929. But since 1929, almost 100 years, we've destroyed the family and our neighbor relationship, our love, our caritas. Governments can't give caritas. They're not people.
Yeah, it's not possible because if you give your money to some faceless entity or NGO and then they distribute whatever it is to the homeless, the person receiving the gift, the homeless person, doesn't feel the same as somebody walking by and like saying, hey, let me buy you a bagel, right? It doesn't feel the same because they know it's not, it's a job for that person.
Right. And people build bureaucracies within those organizations and tell the government we need that much money to help fund it. We're in small nonprofits, which NGO and nonprofits, same thing. They run it like a business. We need to cut expenses. We need to keep our overhead down. This is a mission-based organization. We're not a Fortune 500 company. This is not Goldman Sachs. So when somebody comes in and says they want $500,000, and there are nonprofits that are paying $500 million, $1.5 million, this is completely ludicrous. I mean, 99.9% of the people in the for-profit market don't make those kind of salaries.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be making those kind of salaries in a nonprofit. Either you're in a mission or you're not.
Yeah.
There's a different demand on your body and your mind in a nonprofit than you have it working at Goldman Sachs.
Well, what about the situation where you run a for-profit business, but you just knowing that there's people to be cared for and that you personally have a responsibility to face God one day for the choices you make? Why not just run for-profit entities and say, in some cases, we're going to say no to additional profits because it's benefiting the humans, right? It's benefiting our employees. We don't always have to, because you're especially in a privately owned business, you don't have to do the ROI maxing path.
That's true. I think it would be an example of wages, but also healthcare. A lot of people have taken shortcuts, and I've even seen it, well, let's just have them file for Medi-Cal, which is the counterpart to Medicare in a state of California, where if you're poor enough, make a certain salary, they'll give you medical insurance, and then the employer won't have to pay for it.
So they purposely get lower salaries so they don't have to be involved.
Yeah, and even if they do have a low salary, it doesn't mean they have to be on Medi-Cal. You can pay for their private insurance, which is 10 times better than they're going to get in Medi-Cal. Medi-Cal is a place of last resort, and every state has that. Medicaid, Medi-Cal, whatever they would call it. Medicare is different. I think that's also a problem of our country, but it's different because it's for everybody who's over 65. It's just a safety net, but it's a safety net's provided to everybody in the country instead of the people in need. And so that's another problem why we don't have innovation and we have price increase. Anytime the government gets involved in funding something, we have double-digit inflation. There's no reason to innovate. There's no reason to cut costs because the government's going to keep paying.
Yeah, I mean, that's the example with a lot of the defense companies, right? They didn't have to innovate, and then you get Palmer Luckey comes in and reduces the cost of everything substantially, right? I think it's interesting. I'm curious if you have discussions with other Catholics who are business owners who may not be as convinced of these things as you are. How do you help them recognize the dignity of the human person and especially if they have lots of employees like you do, like how do you keep them focused on, hey, you got to do the right thing for these people? Because yes, you could pay market salary, which would be, you'd end up paying them less, but that's fair because that's what everybody else pays them. But saying, hey, like, let me look at the situation of that particular family, and they can barely afford 2 kids, much less have more. Like, how do you try to talk to other people who are not completely convinced of this and get them to realize that dignity?
Yeah, you have to be careful. There are institutions. I knew Catholic college that used to pay people based on not their position, but the number of kids that they had. It's a novel concept. It sounds more to me like more of a commune or a socialist type of environment. Sometimes they work, but most of the times, jealousy and I'm doing more than them and why should they get paid more than me just because they have more kids? And there's all kinds of arguments. I think what you have to do for families in any play is it's not just about wages and not just about insurance. It's about creating a lifestyle so that their job and their team members are collaborative. And it's not just a job. It's a career, it's a vocation. And we have to educate everybody involved, including the employee themselves, about the importance of every type of work, no matter how low it might seem. Your housekeeper, you mow lawns, paint houses, done all that stuff. It all has dignity. And I think people are Everybody wants to make more money, but most people are on a budget and they've been on one and they'll always be on one. They can't just walk into a store and buy anything in the store. They don't have that kind of money, and they don't really have the desire for that because they know it's not possible. So they need enough steady hours so that they're occupied at least 40 hours a week, and unless they're a housewife and taking care of kids at home, and that's a job in and of itself. And they just need to know that they aren't going to lose their job, one day. Now, fortunately, we're in an economy where it's virtually full employment. So if you do lose your job, it's not like many times in the past you couldn't get another one. So you probably get another one, maybe even a higher salary in a same business.
But it's also, there's a sort of a mental tax, right, when you have to do that. And I think that your point about having people feel comfortable in their role, not that they have to always be on edge about keeping their job and working extra hours and neglecting their family. If their main motivation is, hey, I want to have a family, I want to be able to work and pay my bills and not have to constantly be stressed about it, you can provide that as an employer, even if you're not necessarily going and saying, hey, let me pay extra because they have more kids, right?
Yeah, I think that's a slippery slope. I mean, it sounds good on paper, but it doesn't work because of what I said. But you can do a lot of things. Like we're doing, coming up Sunday, we're doing a summer picnic for all the employees. It's mostly, everybody's welcome, but most of the people that come are the housekeepers and the servers and their kids. And they bring their grandkids. And we get hundreds and hundreds of people. Now, it's a cookout and games and all that stuff, but they look forward to it because they don't get to do those kind of things. Because it doesn't cost anything. It's free. They don't have to pay anything. They're already on a tight budget, and they can't afford to go to some of that kind of thing. So those are the things that we try to do for people. Christmas parties, and people, let's get rid of the parties. People drink or whatever. But it's just a way of saying let's cut costs and not treat them as in the community.
Yes. How do you, as you've grown a business that has how many thousands of employees altogether?
Probably 5,000.
So how do you maintain that perspective that these people are not numbers? Like, how do you do that yourself, but also encourage your managers and everybody else who's like running the businesses on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, we do. My son's the same. He's president of the company, and we speak openly about them and how much we care about them and their job. I do a CEO forum where I sit down with all levels of employees in their small groups and talk about their personal lives, the commutes. Do they have insurance? And what are their challenges in their job? What type of resources do we need to give them to do their job better? And so that's, I think, been very uplifting. I've been doing that for about 15 years. And first of all, you jump over a bunch of reporting levels to get to the bottom line of really what's going on in this place. And you can tell if you've got a good leadership team or not, because it starts showing up. And if everybody's happy, got a good leadership team. If they all are unhappy, you got a bad leadership team.
If busyness and admin work are keeping you from growing your business, it's time to call Paraclete VA. We connect Catholic business owners with elite Catholic virtual assistants worldwide to handle your marketing, finance, and busy work. How it works is you pay $500 on the day they start, and if you're still happy, after 30 days, you pay another $500. Most roles take less than 10 days to fill. To get started, just email admin@catholicfounders.com with a little bit about what you're looking for so you can get back to doing what matters. Yeah, that's a good way to go straight to it. I think that's underrated. There's a lot of talk about Jensen with NVIDIA, how he has like 20 direct reports and he tries to keep a flat organization because he wants to know what's going on in the front lines. But that's interesting. I like that perspective because then you don't, it's basically the principle of subsidiarity where you're understanding the decisions that you're making, how are they affecting the people on the very front lines? Because I'm sure a lot of people can relate. I was in a company at one point where we got purchased and the new ownership didn't really care about us the same way that the founders did. And they start making decisions that affect you personally and the front lines, and they don't care because all they care about is the dollars, right? And you're not consulted in those discussions, but if you have that engagement with your frontline employees, you can make better decisions and they're going to stay happier and you're probably going to be more profitable in the long run too.
Yeah. It develops a personal relationship, a loyalty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If they don't know who you are, and maybe they see you, but they don't really know you. Mm-hmm. When you look at somebody, you have certain judgments about who that person is, but you've never met them.
Yeah. So you have continued to just keep building and keep going, even though you're to an age where you could easily retire. You probably don't have to. So you have this work ethic. And this is a Midwest thing, right? I know a lot of people work really hard from the Midwest, but I'm assuming you've had a lot of peers who have just kind of like stopped doing things and slowed down a bit. Why, kind of a two-part question here. Why do you keep going? And what do you think is the role of people who have achieved things like you have to continue going and continue building?
Yeah, I have many friends that have, and over the last 30 years, guys that were older than me that sold their businesses and got out of it were never happy. And they're always looking for another business. And most people are one-trick pony. You know, they can't just create a new business. They hit it big, but it doesn't mean it translates to another industry. It might. Some people can do that, but most people can't. So getting back to me, I'm 71 years old. I'm in good health. I have a lot of energy. So as long as you have that, why not use that? And I just think this concept that we've created in our country of retirement is ill-formed. And I know people look forward to it. I can't wait till I get to retire. And, you know, I do whatever I want right now. And I go wherever I want and travel whenever I want. So I've got plenty of things. And when you retire like that, you know, idle hands, you know, and you get depression or melancholy, or you're fighting with your wife or your kids or whatever, because you're not focused on creating. That's what God. One thing that we must do is work. And that may be in the home with the family or out in the public, but we have to work. We have to have a purpose and a meaning. And if we don't, it just ultimately breaks down in your physical and mental capacity.
I think it's also, if people were treated better at their jobs, they might not want to retire as soon. They might not long for that retirement, because they were treated with respect and they enjoy it. I mean, you see these stories occasionally still of people who've worked for 30, 40 years at a company, and they're still going at it, because even if it's like a garbage collector, but because they enjoy the work, like you said, they have fun doing it. I think that part about having enjoyment while you do it is pretty important. I don't want to be too criticizing of people, but I think that it's important for the people who have achieved and built something to be able to leverage that success and those networks to continue building things, because there's new things that you can do now that you were not able to do 30 years ago, right? And you can only achieve those because you're in this point, which means that, you know, God might be calling you to do something that he might reveal to you now or next year that he never would have revealed to you 25 years ago, right? And I think that a lot of people just have this idea of stepping aside and just spending all their money and then like partying basically until they die and then giving their kids nothing. But you mentioned earlier that a lot of people who sold their companies weren't really happy. Did you anticipate to always want to build organizations to continue holding forever, or did you change your mind about that over the time? Because you bought your father's market pretty early.
Yeah, it was. I reorganized it with him in 1975, and then in 1986, because of his health, I bought his business. And it was not the right thing for him, but we were trying to grow the business, and he had been through difficult times earlier in his career and was concerned we were betting the bank. And maybe we were, but I think if you're going to let your kids take your business over, you've got to be supportive. I'm in the same situation today. And I reflect back on my dad and what he was doing and try to avoid those mistakes, micromanaging, killing every type of new innovation because it wasn't the way you did it yesterday.
Yeah.
You know, in today's world with AI and everything else, it's going at 100 times as fast as what it was in 1986. But the kids have to raise their own family the way they feel appropriate. They have to run the business. Now, to the extent they need my capital, sure, I'm going to, ask questions, but I try to defer on the side of let's do it unless I have a good reason not.
So is that even I don't know all of the nuances, but have your kids wanted to start their own things and you've kind of like looked at it and helped guide them on doing that? Do you have a thesis on how to prepare them well to run a family business? Because some people critique it and say, oh, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't have your kids take over. I'm generally of the other opinion. I think that your kids are the most well situated to run it, especially if you train them properly from age 0. But what is your kind of thesis around this?
There are certain DNA of certain children that don't want to run a business. That's not my 2 kids were pretty good about it. They learn by example. They're watching you when they're 5 years old. And so just like me, I was raised in an entrepreneurial family. My dad owned his own business. That's not normal, especially back in the 1960s and 70s. Everybody worked for the auto companies in Detroit. Everybody got a check every week. Same check as the next guy. Got paid exactly the same amount. And my dad just didn't go down that route. But the rest of my friends' parents did. And so I think that's taught by example. And my kids, yeah, they've tried to venture into some other things, and especially my son's very entrepreneurial. Some were probably great ideas, but what I think we've agreed on it, we're doing very well, is investing in venture funds with other really, really wealthy people, much wealthier than us. And that seems to be working out much better. It gives you an opportunity to invest in an innovative company, but not have to worry about running it. Running companies, you got only so many of them that you can run.
Yeah.
And I think, and it's a lot of headache. Investing is a lot easier than running companies.
Well, it's also interesting to consider that there are things that you might uniquely be good at, right? And you, like you said, that you really enjoy the hospitality industry, but if you were to go into storage units, you may be good at it, but you may not enjoy it as much. So you may not, focus on being the best, and maybe get somebody else who's, really into it, and they become more interested in the innovation. But if you can choose to do allocations with like VC funds, for example, you can get access to some of that stuff without having to, change your entire disposition of like how you run businesses, because it is very different. I like that a lot. I think it's interesting. I'm wondering if you think that, for me personally, part of the reason I ended up leaving Wisconsin was I felt very stifled by the fact that a lot of people they didn't dream big, and they didn't have this kind of idea of innovation. They weren't really into it as much. Do you think that choosing where to live can really transform the way your kids are kind of naturally disposed to innovation or to business in general?
Well, what you're referencing is when you have people getting the exact same check from the hometown company, they don't want anybody to elevate themselves. They're jealous about that. It's tribal. They want everybody to be together. And it's not right, but that's the way it is. I remember I worked in a factory when I was in college in the summers, and the guys there would say, "You're never going to graduate. What are you doing? You're never going to law school. Why would you do that?" Because it basically is a testimony against them because they didn't do it. And I'm not begrudging them. I'm just saying, you don't stop people from elevating. So I think that's a philosophy that would be never thought of here in New York, and for that matter in California. But in those, kind of Midwestern cities in particular, but I'm sure in the South it's kind of the same thing. But that's different times today. There's a little bit, most people in my town left. They didn't stick around. There were no jobs there. So you went where the more highly educated jobs were. So it's called brain drain. That's why people leave.
Well, what do you think about that? Do you ever consider that, I know you're still involved with the markets back from where you're from, but do you ever consider that there is some responsibility you have to the place that you're from? Because a lot of people in a merit-based society have to go, if they want to be the best, they have to go to the place that has the best, right? In order to be number one, you have to be where the rest are, right? And, New York City is a great example of that. You've got all these consultants, these people come from all over the place. They go to the best schools, they get the best grades, and they finally get here, and then they're working, 80, 90 hours a week for a consulting company and traveling all over the world. But do you ever feel that you have some responsibility to where you're from? Or, I mean, obviously you have some involvement there still, so I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, we have an involvement, and we support, the local charities out of the markets, but I don't put a lot of my personal money back. I do have a scholarship at my high school for kids, but for college, they don't pay for high school. But so I think that's worthy, but I have no interest of living there. It's just not my lifestyle.
Yeah. It's interesting how you're drawn to different places, right? Like I remember reading in the story about how you ended up moving to California from your daughter, that it was just it just seemed natural to you, right? Based on the way she described your personality at that stage. And then you get to California, it really fits nicely, right? I think that there's something to be said about that. I personally struggle sometimes with thinking, maybe I should have stayed in Wisconsin, and just dealt with it and had exposure to go other places. But for me, it just ended up, I just really wanted to be around other people who motivate me, because it's hard to push harder if you're the only one pushing, because eventually you just start to feel like out of place,
You're also a number of profit in your own land, so when you go to someplace else, they don't see you as the guy down the street, Jesus of Nazareth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What do you think the general perspective of Catholics should be when it comes to ambition and building big things and dreaming big and trying to achieve things? Do you think that is something we're called to do, that we should be cautious about how we do it? What is your general perspective there?
I think we're all called to it, to co-create, but we have to do it with humility. And there is a certain amount of cachet that people, when they make money, they go out and buy a fancy car, they go out and get fancy clothes, and they join fancy clubs. And there's nothing wrong with consuming your income, but I think you have to be very careful about it. And today, more so probably than the early 1900s, there's a diverse difference between wealth and the guy working for, that is not investing. And especially since 2008, there's been a huge multiplication of centimillionaires and billionaires, and now a trillionaire. And the guy who's working for $25 an hour, that was probably making $7 an hour 10 years ago, he's got 3 times as much salary. Maybe salary, inflation adjusted, probably has twice as much money. But he's still looking at the guy that's got $1 billion, and at 5% would be making $50 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is irreconcilable. Now, is it wrong? No, but it will create, that's what socialism ends up, because they say, well, we can't earn our way up, so we'll
knock them down.
You'll knock them down. And then everybody's the loser. Those very people need to, first of all, create a relationship with them through the private charitable programs we were talking about earlier, so that the government is not driving a wedge into them. And this classification of people is right out of Karl Marx's book, divide and conquer. We'll have a Black Lives Matter, we'll have a hate Jews, we'll have a hate Asians, we'll have a Democrat, a Republican, a Catholic, a Protestant, a Muslim, a Jew. Let's get them into separate categories and have them fight. And then the state will have to intervene, take over, and we are the state. And anytime this is diabolical, it's inspired by the devil. He does not like unity. He wants division, polarization. And so we have to do our job of going across the aisle and helping people that we don't necessarily agree with. So we do salon dinners. I've done 15, 20 of them, where we bring liberal, progressive Catholics and conservative Catholics. It'd be like bringing Democrats and Republicans together, which we don't do anymore. And yesterday we had an ecumenical forum here all day where we bring Protestants and Catholics together. It's unbelievable. I mean, these guys, they don't understand anything about the Catholic faith, even though we're Christians. And so I was going down the hall explaining Mary, as soon as you mentioned Mary,
that was a little
jerk, oh no, we're Jesus. Oh, so are we. But I said to the guy, we use Mary as an intercessor. And they go, why? You just go to Jesus. I said, have you ever thought about the concept of, if you don't do something, I'm going to tell your mother?
Yeah.
I said, that's kind of what this is about.
Yeah.
Obviously, but I didn't get into she's the Immaculate Conception because that's getting a little bit too far for Protestants.
Yeah.
That she was born without original sin. But, they're really solid people. And I think the more they know about us Catholics, and especially our worship, we did the liturgy of the evening prayer, which all priests do here. And I got done. I said, how was it? This is just like reading the Bible. I go, exactly. Yep. I said, but did you know these 2 priests here every single day, 5 times a day, they pray these prayers. Yeah. And everybody in the world, no matter what they're, different languages, are reading those exact same Bible verses. Every Mass in the world has exactly the same Bible verse. That's a new concept for them, because most Protestant ministers, they don't have a liturgical year. They just choose a theme. Like for the next 6 weeks, we're going to talk about boom. And then he goes, he gets the biblical background. They're very fine, but they're not orchestrated with the rest of the world.
Ready to do business with people who actually share your faith? Join the Catholic Founders Guild today. For just $100 a year, you get access to our membership directory, expert-led monthly calls, and a network of potential investors and partners. There's no heavy time commitment, just a shared belief that we are all called to be instruments of God's will in the world, and not our own. Upgrade your subscription at catholicfounders.com/subscribe. I'm confident in saying it's the best $10 a month you'll ever spend on your business. See you in the Guild. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think that's the best way to really start to bring people together, is to help. It is really just as simple as making sure you understand that the other person's human too, right? They have the same kind of fears that you do. They have the same, they put their pants on one leg at a time, right? Like that's the situation. We can bring more people together. So I appreciate that about ambition, right? So now I'm curious about legacy, because my family's been in the U.S. since 1870, and the best thing we have to show for it is my cousin now. It runs the farm. It's like a 400-acre farm. He's actually turning it back into an operating farm. But I wonder that if we had more thought about the future and the legacy, and that we had this ambition to work together, we could build something better. So my goal is in the next 150 years, I want it to be a little different. Now I'm curious, how do you think about legacy and this idea of keeping these businesses running, ideally getting, in your case, your children are interested in your businesses, getting them to take over and continue this. How do you think about it personally? And how do you think we should, as Catholics, think about legacy and tempering that kind of, about meanness versus like, this is something we've been given to then be stewards of these gifts for other people around us, for the thousands of employees that we provide for, et cetera.
Yeah, I think it's an important concept. I think wealth was 99% about land. If you had land, you were wealthy, and most people didn't. They rented or they sharecropped. Today, wealth is a whole different concept, artificial intelligence, technology. I mean, who would have known that, Elon Musk's Tesla is worth more than all the auto companies put together? Like General Motors and Ford and Chrysler have been, so the farming is now, it's not a family affair anymore. It's people own 20,000 acres of farmland, 2,000 at a minimum. My grandfather had 80, they used to, all the Midwest is divided into 40-acre parcels.
Yes.
And he had two 40-acre parcels. So I think it's totally different now. I do think it's joyful if you can hand a business down. It's not easy. There are a few businesses. I mean, if you go back in Europe, this happens all the time. But here in the United States, especially with, most people didn't care about private businesses. Today, private equity is buying up private businesses in certain industries and rolling them up into a bigger business that's more efficient, profitable, that can be taken public or sold to an even larger company. So there's other exit strategies that did not exist before. I would like my kids to run the business, but at some point in time, when I'm gone, they feel like, hey, it's not going to work. They may have to sell it. And then maybe get another business. But
that's a certain humility though, right? So it's like it takes you to be willing to say, listen, before I go, I need to start bringing them in to have their perspective. Because if I just give them a blueprint and say, you got to go do this, your blueprint for how you would want them to live life is probably going to be a little bit different. Even if it's not majorly different, it's going to be somewhat different from the way they want to live their life. So do you do that right now with involving them in, in all this? Like, where do you guys want to go and setting your own will aside, so to speak?
Yeah, we have a quarterly family meeting with the spouses as well. And we go through all of the financials and if some of the spouses, they're not in the business, so they don't know exactly what's going on other than what their spouses told them. And so we'll go through all those things. We give them access to everything. They probably don't read a lot of it, but they can't say they didn't have it because they have it. It's a lot of material. And, I think transparency is a critical thing. So it's I did estate planning. So when you die and some kid finds out they've been disinherited or some kid got more than the other kid, that's not good.
It's okay to have differences, but make sure it's known beforehand.
Make sure it's known. Don't burden the person that got more.
Yeah, of course.
With the hatred of the person that got less. And I think there should be a certain element of charity, money that goes to foundations that the kids run after your death so that they have a common network to help the people that have less. This brings them together because they have more. But if they just divide their money, then it's not keeping them together.
Yeah. What about part of this? It's kind of similar in the same veins. Is that if we imagine, hypothetically, in another 100 years, your businesses that your family continues to grow, ideally, and maybe they sell some, they switch out other businesses, they start new businesses. The continued impact that they might have on the world can be very large, right? And that can be an inspiration, right? Think about, especially someday, maybe you don't like to think about it this way, but I try to imagine it for you at least. Is there'll be some kid, someday in Michigan thinking about, man, I want to be like Tim when I grow up. I read this book about him, and that gives him inspiration. And I know at least one person who specifically has been inspired by you. I won't say who, but who inspired you the most when you were young, and how did that really push you to go beyond your natural tendency to work hard?
Yeah, well, your parents, for sure, but even outside of that, I worked for a wealthy attorney. Turned out he had some difficulties that I didn't know about, but he had more money than anything I've ever seen. Wasn't a lot of money, but it was more than anything I've ever seen because I was from a little town. I just never saw people that own yachts and cars and homes. But over time, I settled on people like Tom Monahan, who really had focus on, he had the wealth, incredible wealth, $1 billion, and he had faith. And that probably, even though we have a completely different personality, he's an introvert, I'm an extrovert. We had different personalities, 20 years older than me, but we we had the same cause and same meaning for our life. So I was able to see that you could actually be successful and still be super ultra focused on your faith, which he is. I mean, there's very few lay people that are as focused on their faith as he is. And then I've had other people that I've done business with that are not faith-based, but I don't really need that mentorship. A guy like Charles Koch, who has 150,000 employees, who is one of the wealthiest guys in the world that I've spent a lot of time with. And I believe you're learning all the time, because we've learned this is what Jesus was trying to teach us in the Bible, was parables. And Harvard University about 50 years ago started case studies. Case studies are parables. They are parables. Now, in the case of Harvard, they use real parables. In other words, these things actually happen in a business, and we're going to unpack them and see what they did right and what they did wrong. In Jesus' day, he was using parables that were believable that might have happened, but they weren't necessarily something that happened. So he used agrarian concepts, and he knew that even today, 2,000 years later, we're not farmers, but we can kind of know how you farm food and that stuff. You've been close to the farm. I've been worked on farms too, so I have a little better understanding than the average person. But so I do think storytelling, that's what this is all about, is the way we teach people. Not doing written text and about esoteric things. In order for them to remember, people remember stories. They don't remember facts and figures. Now, there are always some people that have photographic memories and got 200 IQs.
Not the average, yeah.
But the average person, they remember watching somebody do something and then mimicking them. And they sometimes can do it in a bad way, too. If you see bad people, you know, like I was a week ago in the gang area of Brooklyn, and those kids, I don't have anything. This gang leader told me that, you know, I don't have a dad, so I might as well join a gang because he's a dad. He's only 10 years older than me. And then next thing you know, they're pseudo-mafia, you know. And so we have to break that up, because that's a direct result of the family breakup, which is a direct result of the subsidy of that family without a father. So that if they didn't have to, if the government wasn't subsidizing, these people wouldn't separate. You know, but they almost are encouraged to separate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the core challenge I find with Catholics, especially successful Catholics. Many are not willing to be as open as you are and like as public as you are, and therefore the stories can't get told, right? Tom is also a great example. Tom is willing to tell his story. What would you encourage others who are in this boat, who have achieved a lot, even if they haven't achieved as much as you have, if they've achieved anything, just a willingness to be more open about their success or their stories, even if it's not all success, maybe some failures too, to help inspire the next generation? Because the way I see it is, there's very few people in the Catholic world that we can look up to at the same kind of stratosphere that like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos are, right? And those guys aren't, you know, they might have some faith, maybe, but I would much rather look up to Tom or to you than to Elon or to Jeff. So I'm just kind of curious how you would encourage others who have achieve something to be more open.
Yeah, some people are better at it than others. I mean, Tom is not the natural extrovert, but he's definitely committed. If he's they're doing a documentary on him right now, and he's written a couple books himself, and they've written books about him, and I think that's admirable. It's personal though. Some people are really, they don't feel comfortable talking about their faith. And I find the more you talk about, it's like teaching. You learn more teaching than the people you're teaching. Because you have to figure it out and explain it to somebody, which causes you to understand it better yourself. The same thing with faith. When you share your faith with other people, it's the only thing you can give away, and you have more when you get done. You know, faith grows from within when you give it away, because that's what God always plans. And so many times we're trying to redo this was what wokeism was. It was the religion of the day. We're going to redefine what marriage is, what a man and woman is, abortion on demand. We're going to divide and conquer, Black Lives Matter, pride, this matters, all that, and just divide people. And it was a religion with no eternal salvation. It was what they call virtue signaling. We're helping these downtrodden people. No, you're not. You're hurting them. You're hurting them by isolating them in society. And we need to unify and to do it with faith. And this idea of I have a faith, but I don't use my faith for political. Wait a minute. You have to run the country with virtue. Yeah. And faith is part of that.
Yeah. And run your company with it too. I think the last thing I'd like to ask you, I think as a good closing, is what we do with the Catholic Founders a lot is try to encourage young men, especially who may not maybe like me or you, they weren't surrounded by a lot of ambitious people from where they're from or whatnot. And a lot of them are also feeling the squeeze of, hey, I want to be able to have 8, 10 kids, but I can't do that with the job I have, so I need to start a business. What would your encouragement be to people now who are thinking about starting a business or thinking about kind of going down that natural tendency they have towards entrepreneurship? What would your encouragement be to them?
Well, not everybody is an entrepreneur. It doesn't bother me. I mean, there are times when you wonder what's going to happen. I think I tell my kids, prayer is the best way to alleviate that, inoculate that. But I find that a lot of people that work with me, they just don't want the risk, the pressure. So I don't think many in the way of a percentage. I don't think 50% of the world wants to be entrepreneurs. Probably less than 5%. But having children, ultimately, it may be tight in the early days, but ultimately your kids are your retirement. That's the way it was. On the farm, you had more kids because they worked when I started working when I was 7 years old in the stores. I got paid, not a lot, but it was a lot for me because I have expenses.
Yeah.
So, in the agrarian society, more children is more help. And I only had 2 children. I wished I had 8. I could have afforded it easily. But you had this idea that you had to work. It was work. It wasn't about money. It was about time. And, I think the children ultimately, within a very short period of time, less than 20 years, they're out providing support to you. And look at my kids. I couldn't trust anybody to run my businesses like I can trust your kids. So that's where it's been a return to me. My son came back from Notre Dame, and I tell the story about the winery. It was losing $1 million a year. And when he got done within 1 year, it was making money. So he gave me $1 million a year by getting educated, which more than paid for his education and then some. And so the children will be your future. They're going to take care of you. This is the other thing we're missing in society is the responsibility that we take care of our children and the children take care of the parents and the grandparents.
Well, it's kind of gone now because a lot of the boomer generation doesn't want to have involvement. They're like, we're not going to give our kids anything. We're going to, well, maybe we'll pay for their college, but we intentionally plan to spend everything. So it's almost like the innate, grown in contract that is between parents and children has been like unintentionally or artificially severed, right? So there is like why the kids think, oh, why should I? Because my parents don't, they don't want to provide for me. We're just going to throw them in a nursing home or something, right? And that's also such an undignified way that you could go out versus being surrounded by family,
Yeah, and it's worse yet. I mean, there are some law firms that they specialize in taking assets from the parents with their intentions, not abuse, putting it in the hands of the kids, and then filing for federal aid to take care of their parents. And they had the money to do it in the first place. And people think this is okay. And it gets back to it's corruption of the federal system. And if there was no federal system, you couldn't have anybody to corrupt. So we Asians are really good at this. You would never think of leaving mom, dad, grandma, and grandpa on their own to starve to death. You just would never do it. It would be a shame for you and your family. So we need more of that culture here in America, that family is important, whether you get along with them or not.
Yeah.
And, we do, my family I've been very much a convener of family with my siblings, cousins, ancestors when they were alive. Most are gone now. And it's important they feel part of the family, not ostracized. Because if you're 95 years old, you've been out of work for 30 years probably. And, you have friends, but do you have family? And some, like my wife's family, sometimes the kids didn't work out so well. So she, as a niece or nephew, a niece in this case, can be supportive, when her parents died 30 years ago. So.
Yeah, it's important. It's a first duty, right? At one point I went to an Opus Dei retreat and I was thinking about, who should I go try to serve and give my time to? And the preacher's like, what are you talking about? Just go to the people, your family, the people in front of you, the people that God put in your life. You don't have to go seeking out somebody else to serve. Like, just help take care of the people in front of you. So I could ask you questions for days, but this has been really good. I think I really appreciate you allowing us to spend some time with you and get some of your wisdom. Hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. God bless you.